There's been quite a bit of right-hand drive news lately, as we've had feedback from Tokyo, where a C8 went on public display for the first time, albeit a left-hand drive car. Taj Gupta has spoken about right-hand drive on an internet TV show, and whichcar.com has also provided some speculation on C8 pricing in Australia. Stay tuned and we'll take a look at all of that and see how it fits together. Let's take a look at the C8's first appearance in Japan, which is a right-hand drive country. A C8 was on display at the Tokyo Auto Salon, one of the world's largest customizing shows. From what I read, the car went over extremely well. It seems the new high-tech mid-engine layout may be far more appealing to the Japanese car enthusiasts than the brute power style of the previous front-engine Corvettes. This was reported in Forbes magazine by their columnist Peter Lyon. GM Japan's president, Tadashi Wakamatsu, told the crowd Japan would get the 2LT and 3LT trim Corvettes, but there was no mention of a base-level 1LT trim. Lyon spoke in his article of the entry-level price in Japan being around $100,000, although he didn't attribute this price to the GM president. It appears this is the price expectation in Japan rather than anything official, but that's only what I can get from the article. I need to say I'm not really sure where this $100,000 came from. C8 Executive Chief Engineer Taj Gupta appeared on Autoline After Hours, a YouTube automotive TV show where he discussed a range of topics, including right-hand drive. One of the lines coming out of the interview was Taj admitting, "We're taking a little bit of a bet there." Let's listen to a bit of what Taj said.
It's going to be relatively low volume. There's relatively few markets. It's new for us. We never sold a car in Australia. We know we have passionate fans there, but we really don't have a great sense of what the volume's going to be. So we had to look at new ways of tooling parts to do the exact part that looks like it, but a mirror image of it, to get to the right-hand drive and do it at a reasonable business case.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
So we're taking a little bit of a bet there. You know, we have people come to Corvette events from Australia.
But you got to be looking beyond Australia.
Japan, you got
Japan, which we sell in okay.
The UK.
UK we don't sell a lot, but I think our volume will go up there doing a real right-hand drive.
That's also pretty
going
dinky.
to South Africa is too small at this point. But we're dipping our toe in the water for right-hand drive, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it'll take off.
You'll notice here that Taj, and presumably GM, are primarily focusing on Australia regarding the right-hand drive C8. What does surprise me, though, is that GM and Holden haven't reached out to the local Corvette community here. Maybe they will in the future. It's always been a big thing in the US for GM to talk to the Corvette clubs. Automotive website whichcar.com recently published an article from its sister publication Wheels magazine, which claimed the C8 Corvette may be cheaper than expected in Australia. They claim that previously a price of 170,000 Australian dollars had been given to them via nods and winks, but that more recently a senior source has suggested that the price could be considerably less. This source has told Wheels that enthusiasts were to get a decent slice of change for an 150,000 Australian dollars. They suggest Holden may have followed the example of Toyota, who hinted at a price of some $40,000 prior to the launch of the 8.6 sports car. When the 8.6 was launched, the price turned out to be $29,990. The same was also the case in the US, where no one expected the sub-$60,000 price for the base C8, with the majority of people suggesting the price would be over $100,000. So maybe we've been fooled all along by GM and Holden. Let's look at the news I've just been through, and let's see if we can make some sense of it all. It's interesting to note that GM is talking about selling the 2LT and 3LT trim levels in the right-hand drive Japan cars. This is at least a bit better than the rumour of 3LT only in Australia. But even the 2LT adds over US $7,000 to the price of a C8 in the US, which translates to about 15,000 Australian dollars here. There was no feedback of the Z51 package being mandatory in Japan, but that may not mean anything one way or the other. But mention of 2LT does offer a bit of a hope for us. Moving on to the Taj Jukta interview, we do note that Australia is acknowledged as the great hope for right-hand drive cars, so we could assume GM and Holden are thinking carefully about their pricing. Taj wonders how the right-hand car will go. He said, "We're dipping our toe in the water for right-hand drive, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it takes off." Well, I'd be happy to give Taj the answer on that one. There's a huge following for Corvettes in Australia. If the price is right, you'll sell plenty. If it's too expensive, most Corvette enthusiasts simply won't be able to afford it. It's really as simple as that. Outside the US and Canada, Australia is the country that wants Corvette the most, and in fact American cars in general. But there are two problems for sales in Australia. The first problem is the exchange rate between the Australian dollar and the US dollar. It wasn't that long ago the US dollar and Australian dollar were at parity. In early 2013, the $2 amounts were equal, and up to late 2014, the exchange rate was about 90 cents to the US dollar. At the beginning of 2018, it was 80 cents, but now it's dropped down to more like 68 cents. The second problem is Australia's luxury car tax, the LCT. Now, there's no luxury tax on private jets or helicopters, luxury cruisers or yachts, or on luxury homes. In fact, there's even a tax concession on luxury apartments if buying off the plan. The LCT was actually a protective tax on the Australian car industry against imported cars. The tax, however, has been retained even though the Australian car industry has ceased to exist. So we're left with a luxury tax that applies to cars only, but doesn't apply to far more expensive luxury goods. But unfortunately, we're stuck with these two problems at the moment, and this means selling an expensive version of the Corvette in Australia moves the price quickly out of reach of the very people who would normally buy it. So GM and Holden must walk a tightrope between selling Corvettes in base configuration that reportedly costs them money, or selling cars with an upgraded spec that makes them too expensive to get any volume. But is there somewhere in the middle? Let me run through 5 possible scenarios for pricing of the Corvette in Australia. But let me first confess that I'm a potential buyer, so when I talk about pricing, I have to admit I'm somewhat talking through my own pocket. I'll give you 5 scenarios as to how the pricing in Australia might go. I won't go through the calculations here because I've done it several times before, but if you want to know how I do the calculations, go to my website. The link is below in the comment section. Scenario number 1. We get the Canadian pricing for a base model. Canada gets a special price, which is probably something to do with the cross-border trading. But if GM did give us the same pricing, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Australian sales challenged those of Canada, GM's biggest export market. I've done the price calculations in a previous video. This would give us an Australian entry-level price of $99,000. Scenario 2. We get the US pricing for a base model. If GM really wants to sell in Australia, they should provide the same price as the US to really find out how strong the market is in Australia. Adding Z51 and upgraded interior options as mandatory really kicks up the price in Australia. So make some available at base level. This would give us an Australian entry-level price of $112,000. Now, one of these first 2 deals would really make the locals happy and would provide GM the sales volume they want. But since we've been told these prices result in the car being sold for under cost, it's unlikely to happen. What the break-even pricing really is up to the number crunchers to decide, but I think we all know that numbers like this are an art rather than a science, and the number crunchers can make that break-even price whatever they want it to be. So let's look at a couple of other possibilities. Scenario number 3, sell the base model but add a little bit more profit. Instead of adding the Z51 and 3LT options, as we've been previously told, which will bump the Australian price up by 35,000 Australian dollars, just up the price by, say, half that without adding any options and give us a cheaper car. For instance, add $8,000 US to effectively make the base model $68,000 US. This will increase sales volume in Australia and should give GM the return they want on the car. This would give us an Australian entry-level price of $127,000. Scenario number 4. Give us the specification most people would choose. Buying the car in the US and wanting an upgraded car and best value for money, the most popular configuration seems to be the base car plus performance exhaust and the 2LT trim. If this was the base level spec in Australia, it would bring the US price to around $68,500. Not as good for GM profit, but a possibility. This would give us an Australian entry-level price of 129,000 Australian dollars. And finally, scenario number 5, adding the Z51 and 3LT options to the base car. This is the configuration we've been previously told we will get. It adds a Z51 pack that would not be chosen by most people because it's a track pack, plus the top-of-the-line 3LT trim. Altogether, this bumps up the price in Australia by about 35,000 Australian dollars over the base price in scenario number 2. And this would ensure that GM got very low sales in Australia. This top-of-the-line price, by my calculation, comes up to 147,000 Australian dollars. So those are the scenarios I see for the pricing of the Corvette C8 in Australia. GM could also mix these different options, providing only a limited number of the base level or near base level C8s, and this would surely give Corvette a fighting chance of success in Australia. Does GM want to try to make an impact in Australia with the Corvette, making it firmly a halo or inspirational car? Or does it want to make it an expensive car that sells less than $200 a year? It's not much use having a halo car that no one sees except at a dealership. How many times have you visited a Ferrari or Lamborghini showroom just to take a look at the cars? If you're like me, never. So that's where we are with C8 in Australia. I'm afraid we're still in the dark on what we're going to get and what we're going to be paying. But there is a bit of hope around. I'm afraid I've got to say that I'm not too hopeful of buying a C8 anytime soon. Like many of you who've contacted me, I believe that $120,000 is the sweet spot for C8 in Australia. And also remember, there's still on-road costs and insurance to add to that. And that'll be another $10,000 or so. But for now, thanks for watching. And as always, if you liked my video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. There's also more to read on my website. The link is down below. Happy vetting, and I hope to talk to you again real soon.